Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the tools that are used for cutting rafters, cutting the pitch on rafters. But before we start that, the difference between a rafter and a joist. A joist is always level. Whether it's a floor joist holding a floor diaphragm that's level, or a ceiling joist that happens on top of the walls and defines the ceiling of a roof system, the joist is level, the rafter is sloped. Okay, this is a mistake people make sometimes. They call them roof joists. Ceiling, rafters, this is backwards. A joist is level, a rafter is pitched. This is a speed square, very handy tool. This is a framing square. People call it a carpenter square or a steel square. The framing square is a profoundly underappreciated tool, and frankly you have to have a little education to be able to use it. You also can't carry it with you all the time. I mean, there's no way to carry this and climb around and be agile. This is meant to use on the ground, at a bench, at a set of sawhorses. This is an adaptation of some of the critical aspects of this tool that can be carried in your bags, used just as a simple square, or as a scribe, or as a gauge, but primarily people think of it as a way to put the pitch on a roof. This is a 3/12 roof pitch, and here is how a framing square identifies that pitch. On the short leg, you put the 3 flush with the edge of the board. On the long leg, you put the 12 flush with the edge of the board, and that describes a 3/12 pitch. 3 inches of rise, 12 inches of run. Now let me show you how that works with the speed square. You put the pivot of the speed square on an edge of the board, and then you rotate the speed square and read the pitch designated in number of inches of rise per 12 inches of run. Bring it down until the 3 is flush with the edge of the board. You will know that this leg of this right triangle is plumb or vertical. So this is called a speed square for good reason. And probably 80% of the people that own these use them for making square lines 100% of the time. They're fast. It's like this. Boom. Square. That's a speed square. Now the alternative, of course, if you have the framing square, is nearly as fast, a little less certain, square line. But you just can't beat this. Speed also comes into the equation, establishing the roof pitch. As we just demonstrated, it's fast to throw that down on the board, hit the pivot, swivel to the mark, and mark it. Contrast that with the framing square. You have to deliberately set the mark on one edge, deliberately set the mark on the other edge, capture the and see it moved. Capture it. A speed square is pretty handy, but it will not do the things that this will do. Let me show you how these rafter tables work.
A circle with a scorpion inside it. Ew.
You're gonna eat it?
No, there's a scorpion!
Oh.
So on a real framing square, there will be rafter tables. And as you can read, there are 6 different tables on this side of this square. As an example, length of common rafter per foot of run. On this little building, it's a 3/12 pitch and it's 8 feet wide. But the run is the amount of horizontal distance that an individual rafter is spanning. So for one of these rafters, the run is 4 feet minus half of the thickness of the ridge. So you would calculate that. That's 3 feet 11 1/4 inches. You would put that in a decimal equivalent, and then you would come down this scale to the number value that is right directly below the 3, because the 3 signifies 3/12 pitch. On a 3/12 pitch, the length of the rafter per foot of horizontal distance is 12.37 inches. Where are we? 12.37 is the distance on this rafter on what is the hypotenuse of this triangle. It's 12.37 inches from here to here. Those values are all given on this set of numbers on this wonderfully versatile tool and can be used to calculate the rafter length without measuring anything in the structure, but rather just working off a set of plans. In addition to the tables that give length of common rafters per foot of run for each of the roof pitches, length of hip or valley rafters per foot of run for each of the roof pitches, we have a table that gives difference in length of jacks, that is, the intermediate rafters that go from the ridge to the hip or the ridge to the valley. Let me say that again. From the plate to the hip or the ridge to the valley on 16-inch centers or 24-inch centers. We also have tables that give us the side cut of those jacks, which is not necessarily 45 degrees. So this will give us the side cut, and it will also give us the side cut of hip or valley jacks. Handy. If you're a roof cutter, you've got to be able to use that. So this table is a brace table. So this is an example of a knee brace. It's not a great example, but you see that this 2x4 is located in the hypotenuse of this triangle. And the brace table on a framing square describes the length of that brace or that hypotenuse. For instance, if we were going to come down 24 inches by 24 inches on the legs of a triangle, then the knee brace or the hypotenuse of the triangle would be 33.94 inches long. If the brace was going to originate 48 inches from the 90 and die 48 inches from the 90, then the hypotenuse of the triangle or the brace would be 67.88 inches long. This is a brace table. It ranges from 24 by 24 to 60 by 60, and I expect that that is a 30, 60, 90 triangle. This table is a sort of multiplication table. Many of the tables, in fact, most of the applications of this square for cutting roofs have been obviated by construction master calculators and by the Rafter table books that roof cutters carry around with them. It's still good to know how to use this. But this gives you the length of 2 times 8 equals 1 foot 4, which is 16 inches. 2 times 9 equals 1 foot 6, which is 18 inches. 2 times 10 equals 1 foot 8, which is 20 inches. 2 times 11 is 1 foot 10, which is 22 inches, etc. That becomes useful if you have larger numbers. For instance, we know, being consistent, that 16 times 8 is 10 foot 8. 16 times 9 is 12 feet. 16 times 10 is 13 feet 4. All of these numbers became a calculator for the carpenters who were calculating the hypotenuse of triangles and common rafters in hips and valleys, who were doing the math without the benefit of a calculator and didn't have time to do everything longhand every time, but could have if they needed to. But here's an interesting characteristic that a lot of people never notice, that on this square, this scale is divided into inches and tenths of an inch. This scale is divided into inches and twelfths of an inch. You'll notice that in between what are the quarter-inch gradations, it's divided into 3 pieces, not 4. And this scale also is divided into twelfths, while this scale is divided into the customary 16ths of an inch that we're used to seeing on metal tapes. That would help a carpenter as he was converting the rafter tables into tenths, twelfths, hundredths. It was important for him to have these different references in his length in making his calculations quickly. Some squares, and I'll show you one here in a minute, even have a little table on there which tries to give you hundredths of an inch in a 1-inch segment so that you could at least estimate your decimals back over to fractions. So let's do a quick comparison of 2 squares that were probably made 100 years apart. This square belonged to my grandfather, was given to my dad soon after he was married, and it has all of the same scales and capacities that this modern square, I bought this at a clearance sale sometime, 4 or 5 years ago. They're good squares. This one's made by Stanley, this one is made by Nichols, which was a very well-regarded manufacturer of measuring instruments. Rafter tables, brace tables. This does not have the multiplication aid, but instead it has a detailed explanation of using the rafter tables to calculate rafter lengths and jack lengths. I'm not going to read that to you. You can get that out of any rafter framing book, figure it out, or revisit. It's part of the conversation we had in this video. It's not hard, but you have to know how to do it. Interesting that they would print the directions on a square 100 years ago. There are a couple of obvious to me, as I hold these, differences between these squares. This is made of steel, this is made of aluminum. I like the aluminum square, it doesn't weigh much. But there are reasons that a steel square could be more desirable. Steel square is tough. It's hard to bend. If it does get bent, I'll show you how to fix it. An aluminum square bends easily, doesn't weigh much. The numbers are nicely contrasted with a black, sort of an anodized finish, and a yellow paint down in the bottom of the numbers. You can read it. Rust will disfigure. You can see I've polished this up. I should have done it years ago. Makes it hard to read these tables when they get rusty. In the sun, if you've ever worked in the American Southwest, I've worked in Las Vegas, a steel square in the sun will blister your hand. An aluminum square in the sun is hot, but does not hold as much heat and will not give you the same kind of a burn. Here's how you test your square. Put it against the edge of a nice straight piece, scribe a line. Flip your square over, try to stay out of the shadow. Scribe another line. This square is not square. Can you see that? We have about a 1/16 of an inch of gap. We have a 1/4 of an inch of gap. This square is about an 1/8 of an inch too far open. We draw a line from the inside corner to the outside corner. In order to close this square back to 90 degrees, we have to stretch the metal at the outside of the corner. We're going to do that with a center punch and a hammer on an anvil. I'm going to take this center punch and I'm going to put about 3 marks all on the outside of the center of this line, which is going to stretch the steel on that side, which will bring this square back to 90 degrees. I'll come right out about 1/4 of an inch back from the corner and set. I'll come back about an 1/8 of an inch and set. I'll come back another 1/8 of an inch, set it. Let's check it and see what we've done. Now we know that these 2 lines were square with each other using a square that was in fact 90 degrees. We're going to verify against those lines and see how we've done. Perfect. That's how you tune a square. I've got to confess some ignorance. I have no idea what this table is for. These appeared to be 1, 2, 3, 4/5 of an inch, but they're not. You see, we're lined up at the 2, but if you come out to 14, which would be 12 inches down the line, we do not line up with what should be the 12-inch distance. So these are all a little more than 1 inch apart, divided into 5 increments. I have no idea what it's for. Will somebody out there who knows more about this game than I do, please respond and let me know what in the world that table is for on my framing square. Appreciate it.